What if I told you that the biggest star in women's basketball history just got blocked by one of the loudest, richest, most outspoken men in all of sports media? And what if I told you that same man, the guy who built an empire out of pizza reviews and gambling takes, is now the one screaming the loudest that the league is treating its golden goose like garbage? Buckle up, because this story has everything. A superstar, a billionaire blogger with a megaphone, a league that can't seem to get out of its own way, and a question that nobody in the WNBA wants to answer out loud. What happens when the one player carrying your entire sport on her back goes down, and the whole thing freezes over like a lake in January? This is the story of Caitlin Clark, Dave Portnoy, and a league that is, right now, sitting on ice. Let me take you back. Because to understand why everyone is losing their minds right now, you have to understand just how big this got and how fast. Not long ago, the WNBA was a league that most casual sports fans barely thought about. It existed. It had great players. It had incredible athletes who could absolutely ball. But it lived in the shadows. Ratings were small. Arenas had empty seats. National TV games were rare, and when they aired, the numbers were modest. Players were underpaid, underappreciated, and constantly fighting just to be taken seriously. That was the reality for years and years. And then came a girl from Iowa with a logo three-pointer and ice water in her veins. Caitlin Clark didn't just arrive. She detonated. In college, she rewrote the record books. She became the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I basketball history, men's or women's, passing names that people thought would never be touched. She was launching shots from the half-court line like it was a layup. She was throwing no-look passes that made grown analysts gasp. She was dropping 40 points like it was a Tuesday. And people, regular people who had never watched a single second of women's basketball in their lives, started tuning in just to see what this kid would do next. Her college games started outdrawing men's games. Let that sink in. The women's national championship pulled in more viewers than the men's. That had never happened. Not once. Not ever. Caitlin Clark was a one-woman cultural earthquake, and the ground was still shaking when she got drafted into the WNBA. And here's where the Real story begins. Because when Caitlin Clark walked into the WNBA, she didn't walk in alone. She brought millions of new eyeballs with her. People who had never cared about the league suddenly had a reason to care. Ticket prices for Indiana Fever games exploded. Some games saw prices jump to levels you'd expect for a playoff battle or a championship final. Road arenas that used to have thousands of empty seats were suddenly selling out because everybody wanted to see the Caitlin Clark show roll into town. Teams started moving Fever games into bigger buildings just to fit all the people who wanted in. And the television numbers? They went absolutely nuclear. Games featuring Caitlin Clark started pulling in numbers the WNBA had never seen in its entire existence. We're talking about contests that averaged over 2 million viewers. One game between the Fever and the Chicago Sky, the Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese rivalry that the whole country wanted to see, peaked at over 3 million viewers and averaged close to 3 million. That was the most watched WNBA game in the history of the sport on that network. The most watched ever in the entire history of the league. Think about what that means. A rookie, a first-year player, was pulling numbers that the league's biggest legends, its Hall of Famers, its champions, had never gotten close to. 9 of the 10 most watched games in a season were Indiana Fever games. 9 out of 10. That is not a coincidence. That is not. The league is growing on its own. That is one human being moving the needle like a wrecking ball. The whole sport was riding a rocket. And the rocket had one name on it. Now, enter Dave Portnoy. If you don't know who Dave Portnoy is, let me paint the picture. He's the founder of Barstool Sports. He's a guy who built a media empire from nothing, starting with a little newspaper he handed out on the streets, and turned it into one of the loudest, most chaotic, most followed brands in all of sports and internet culture. He reviews pizza one slice at a time, and the videos get millions of views. He bets enormous amounts of money on football games and broadcasts the whole emotional roller coaster live. He picks fights. He starts feuds. He says exactly what he thinks, consequences be damned. Love him or hate him, when Dave Portnoy talks, a whole lot of people listen. And Dave Portnoy became absolutely obsessed with Caitlin Clark. He started showing up to Fever games. He wore her jersey. He posted about her constantly. For a guy who, by his own admission, never paid much attention to women's basketball before, he had become one of Caitlin Clark's biggest and loudest public supporters. He saw what she was. He saw the star power. He saw the way she filled arenas and broke ratings records. And as a businessman, as a guy who understands attention and money better than almost anyone alive, he saw something else too. He saw a league that, in his eyes, was completely failing the very player who was saving it. And that's when Dave Portnoy stopped being just a fan and started being a critic. A loud one. Let's start with the money. Because this is where Portnoy went off and, honestly, where he made one of his strongest points. When Caitlin Clark signed her shoe deal with Nike, a lot of people celebrated. A big endorsement deal, a signature shoe coming, the whole package. But Dave Portnoy looked at the numbers and just about lost his mind. He came out and called it, in his words, the dumbest contract he had ever seen. He said he wrote about it the instant she signed it. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if he had been her agent, he would have gotten her so much more because she got screwed. And then he dropped the comparison that really stuck. He pointed out that Nike pays NBA player Devin Booker something like $40 million a year. $40 million. And he asked the question that a lot of people were thinking. In what universe is Devin Booker, a very good player but not exactly a household name in every living room in America, worth $40 million a year, while Caitlin Clark, the single most popular and marketable basketball player in the country right now, the woman selling out arenas and breaking every ratings record in sight, is reportedly worth only around $8 million. Now, Portnoy made another point that's important here, and it's a point about how the WNBA operates. He talked about how the league always seems to fall back on history. They'll say things like, well, look at what we did years ago, look at how far we've come, look at the sacrifices that were made. And Portnoy basically said, who cares? That doesn't matter in a negotiation. What matters is right now. The league is making money right now. The star is here right now. The attention is here right now. And if you don't take advantage of the moment when the moment is happening, the moment passes you by. That's just business. That's how the real world works. He even pointed out something that fans had been suspicious about for a while. Nobody really knows exactly how much money the WNBA makes, because its revenue is all mixed in with the NBA's books. It's tangled together. So when the league cries poor, when they say there's no money to pay the players more, there's no real transparent way to check that claim. And to a businessman like Portnoy, that smells fishy. That smells like an excuse. So that's strike one in Portnoy's eyes. The money. The way he sees it, the most valuable asset in the entire sport is being underpaid and undervalued, and the league seems weirdly fine with that. But the money was just the beginning, because the next thing set Portnoy off even harder, and it tapped into something a lot of fans had been feeling for a long time. The marketing. Or, more specifically, what Portnoy saw as the league actively refusing to market its biggest star. Here's what happened. The WNBA put out a promotional graphic for an upcoming Indiana Fever game. A promotional graphic. The whole point of a promo graphic is to get people excited, to sell tickets, to get eyeballs on the broadcast. And the most logical, most obvious, most no-brainer thing to do would be to put the biggest star in the league front and center on that graphic. Right? You lead with your best. You lead with the player that millions of people are tuning in to see. But the graphic didn't feature Caitlin Clark. The single biggest draw in the history of the league, the woman whose games account for almost every ratings record on the books, and she wasn't the focus of the promo for her own team's game. Dave Portnoy saw that, and he absolutely erupted. He went on social media and basically said there is no other conclusion you can draw from this marketing decision except that the WNBA hates Caitlin Clark. He said it flat out. The WNBA hates Caitlin Clark. And he wasn't being subtle about it. He was furious, because to him, and to a lot of fans watching, it felt like the league was going out of its way to downplay the one player who had done more for them than any marketing campaign ever could. Now, why would a league do that? Why on earth would you bury your biggest star? And this is where the story gets really interesting because it gets into the messy, complicated, very human drama happening inside the league itself. See, not everyone in the WNBA loved the Caitlin Clark phenomenon. And you can kind of understand why, even if you don't agree with it. Imagine you've been grinding in this league for 10 years. You've sacrificed. You've played for small paychecks. You've fought for respect that the world wouldn't give you. You're a champion, an all-star, a legend in your own right. And then a rookie walks in, and suddenly she's the face of everything. She gets all the attention, all the cameras, all the magazine covers, all the conversation. People who never watched a single one of your games are now flooding in for hers. That's a tough pill to swallow. And some players, some veterans, made it pretty clear that they weren't thrilled about it. There were hard fouls. There were physical, borderline cheap shots. There were comments in interviews that ranged from mildly dismissive to openly hostile. There was this whole undercurrent of, why does this one rookie get all the credit when we built this league? And Portnoy, watching all of this, came to a blunt conclusion. He felt the league, the players, the establishment, were so caught up in their resentment and their pride and their grudges that they were willing to sabotage the best thing that ever happened to them. He felt they were letting their feelings get in the way of the business. And in his world, the business is everything. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't bury the star printing money for your entire industry. But that, he believed, was exactly what was happening. Now, let's talk about the part of this story that's the scariest of all for the WNBA. The injuries. And what they revealed. Because here's the thing about building your entire surge of popularity on the shoulders of one player. If that player goes down, you find out very quickly just how fragile the whole thing really is. And Caitlin Clark went down. More than once. She dealt with a quad injury, then a groin injury, and what started as a couple of missed games stretched into weeks, and then stretched into months. And eventually she was ruled out for the rest of the season. The biggest star in the sport, the engine of the entire ratings boom, was suddenly sitting on the bench in street clothes, watching her team play without her. And when she sat down, the numbers told a brutal story. National TV ratings for the WNBA reportedly dropped by over 50% after Caitlin Clark went out. Over 50%. Some reports put it at 55%. Think about that. More than half of the audience. Gone. Vanished. The Fever's nationally televised games, which were averaging well over 1.5 million viewers, sometimes pushing close to 2 million with Clark on the floor, came crashing down to numbers under 1 million without her. There was one network, a Friday night package, that had a whole slate of Fever games scheduled. 7 of the 8 games they had lined up ended up not featuring Caitlin Clark because of her injury. And the difference was stark. The one game that did have her averaged over 1.25 million viewers. The 7 that didn't averaged under 1 million. Same team. Same jersey. Same city. The only difference was whether number 22 was on the court or not. This is what Portnoy and a lot of others had been screaming about. This is the proof. This is the smoking gun. When Caitlin Clark plays, the country watches. When she doesn't, a huge chunk of that audience clicks away and finds something else to do. The WNBA, by leaning so hard on the Clark effect while seemingly resenting it at the same time, had created a monster of a problem. They were addicted to her drawing power, but the institution itself seemed unwilling to fully embrace and protect her. And that's where Portnoy's most pointed warning came in. He basically said, look, the league has to protect this player. He talked about being done watching the league fail to protect its brightest star. The hard fouls, the physical play, the lack of calls from the referees, the sense that opponents were allowed to just beat her up out there without consequence. His fear, and the fear of a lot of fans, was simple. If Caitlin Clark keeps getting hurt, if the league doesn't protect her, then the golden goose stops laying golden eggs. And then where does the WNBA go? Right back to the shadows it just climbed out of. Now here's where the story gets a fascinating twist, because it's not all doom and gloom, and this is important to be fair about. Despite all the injuries, despite Clark missing huge chunks of the season, the WNBA actually posted a viewership increase for the regular season as a whole. Year over year, the league beat its own record-setting numbers from the previous season. Across the major networks, ratings were up. One network was up 6%. Another was up 16%. Studio shows about the league saw their numbers climb too. So the league's defenders pointed at this and said, see? We're not just a one-woman show. The sport is growing on its own. The interest is real, with or without Clark. The rivalries are compelling. Other stars are emerging. People are falling in love with the whole product, not just one player. And there's truth in that. There genuinely is. The WNBA has more genuine fans now than it's ever had. The growth is real, and it's broader than just one name. To pretend otherwise would be dishonest. But here's the catch, and this is where the two sides of the argument collide head-on. Yes, the regular season numbers held up and even grew. But the biggest, most-watched games were still overwhelmingly the Clark games. 9 of the 10 most-watched contests were Fever games. The All-Star game, when she was hurt and her presence was diminished, took a noticeable hit. And the most damning stat of all is that direct comparison. Same network, same kind of game. With Clark, the numbers soar. Without her, they sag. So, who's right? The league that says we're bigger than one player? Or Portnoy, and the critics who say you're fooling yourselves and you're going to learn the hard way? The honest answer is, they're both a little bit right, and that's exactly what makes this so explosive. The WNBA really has grown into something bigger and more sustainable than it used to be. But Caitlin Clark is still, by a country mile, the single biggest accelerant the sport has ever seen. Both things are true at the same time. And the tension between those two truths is what's fueling this entire war of words. Now, let's get to the part of the story that turned all of this from a serious business debate into pure, chaotic, can't-look-away drama. The blocking. Yes. Caitlin Clark, according to reports, blocked Dave Portnoy. After all that, after wearing her jersey to games, after defending her contract, after screaming that the league hated her, after positioning himself as basically her biggest hype man in all of media, Caitlin Clark reportedly blocked him. And the reason, based on the reporting, is almost too perfect. It allegedly involved a rogue FaceTime call from one of the co-hosts of a Barstool podcast. Picture this. Somebody in the Barstool orbit decides to, for whatever reason, FaceTime Caitlin Clark out of nowhere. An unsolicited video call. And the fallout from that little stunt apparently led to Clark hitting the block button on Portnoy himself. Now think about how wild that is from Portnoy's perspective. Here's a guy who has spent enormous energy publicly fighting for her, defending her contract, calling out the league for not marketing her, demanding that they protect her from injuries. And his reward is to get blocked, possibly over something one of his own guys did without thinking. You can almost feel the comedy and the frustration of it. The biggest cheerleader, locked out by the very person he was cheering for. And it tells you something deeper about this whole saga, too. Caitlin Clark, through all of this noise, all of these grown men and media giants fighting about her, fighting for her, fighting over what she means and what she's worth, she's just trying to be a basketball player. She didn't ask to be the center of a media war. She didn't ask for billionaires to make her contract a national debate. She didn't ask to be the human ratings machine that an entire league's fortunes rise and fall on. She just wanted to hoop. And the blocking, in a strange way, feels like a person trying to put up one small wall in a life where everyone wants a piece of her. So let's step back and look at the whole board, because this is so much bigger than one promo graphic or one shoe deal or one blocked phone number. This is a story about leverage, about power, about who really holds the cards in a sport that just struck gold. On one side, you have the league, an institution with history, with pride, with a long memory of being overlooked and underfunded. An institution that, understandably, wants to believe it's bigger than any one player. That wants the credit for its own growth. That doesn't want to admit that one 22-year-old from Iowa is the reason the lights got so bright so fast. There's ego in that. There's also legitimate pride and legitimate accomplishment in that. On the other side, you have the reality of the numbers. And the numbers are cold, and they do not care about feelings. The numbers say that when Caitlin Clark plays, America watches, and when she sits, America changes the channel. The numbers say she is, right now, the most valuable individual asset in the sport, and it isn't particularly close. And caught in the middle, you have Dave Portnoy, this loud, polarizing, impossible-to-ignore figure who has appointed himself the truth-teller in all of this. Whether you love him or you can't stand him, he keeps saying the thing out loud that the league seems to wish everyone would stop saying. He keeps pointing at the giant elephant in the room and going, "Hey, are we all going to pretend we don't see this?" And then looming over the entire thing is the contract fight, the collective bargaining agreement. Because all of this is happening at the exact moment the players and the league are heading into negotiations over a new deal. New money, new revenue splits, new rules. And the players are looking at these ratings, looking at the Clark effect, looking at the sold-out arenas and the record TV numbers, and they're saying, we deserve a much bigger piece of this pie. We are the show. Pay us like it. And the league is in this incredibly awkward position. Because if they admit how much money is rolling in, they have to pay up. But if they cry poor, they have to explain why the numbers and the ticket sales and the sponsorship interest are exploding. And the players have a walking, talking, three-point shooting piece of evidence in Caitlin Clark that the demand is sky high. Portnoy even noted this, that the strong viewership without Clark actually helps the players in those negotiations, because it lets them argue the whole league has value, not just one star. The irony there is delicious. The same numbers that the league might want to use to downplay Clark can be flipped around by the players to demand more money for everyone. It's a chess match. And everyone's a little bit afraid of saying the wrong thing. So where does this leave us? Where does the story go from here? Well, the title of all this chaos kind of says it. The WNBA is on ice. And that phrase cuts a couple of different ways. On one hand, the league is frozen in a really uncomfortable spot. They can't fully admit how much they need Caitlin Clark without undercutting their own narrative of independent growth and without handing the players a fortune in the next contract. But they also can't afford to keep treating her like just another player, because the second she's not on the floor, half the audience disappears. They're frozen between pride and reality, between the past they came from and the future she's dragging them toward. On the other hand, when your one irreplaceable star keeps landing on the injured list, the whole product gets put on ice along with her. The momentum cools. The buzz quiets down. The casual fans drift away. And a league that was on fire just months ago suddenly finds itself trying to keep warm. And here's the question that should keep every executive in that league up at night. What is the plan? What is the actual, concrete plan to protect this player, to market this player, to build around this player, and at the same time to grow everyone else so that the entire thing isn't one ankle sprain away from collapse? Because right now, the strategy looks confused at best. You've got a generational talent who's selling out buildings and shattering records. You've got a contract that her loudest defender calls the dumbest he's ever seen. You've got promotional materials that somehow leave her off. You've got opponents allowed to hammer her physically without enough protection from the officials. And you've got a billionaire media giant screaming from the rooftops that the league is fumbling the greatest gift it's ever been handed. That's not the picture of a league that has it all figured out. That's the picture of a league standing on thin ice, trying to figure out which way to step. And maybe that's the real lesson buried inside all of this noise and drama and blocked phone numbers. When lightning strikes, when you catch a once-in-a-generation phenomenon, you have a choice. You can wrap your arms around it, protect it, build a fortress around it, and ride it as far as it'll take you. Or you can let your pride and your grudges and your old wounds get in the way and watch the moment slip through your fingers. Dave Portnoy thinks the WNBA is choosing the second path. The league insists it knows what it's doing. And Caitlin Clark, the woman at the center of the storm, is just out there trying to get healthy, trying to hoop, and apparently trying to block out at least one very loud voice in the process. The funny thing is, even getting blocked, Portnoy probably won't shut up. That's not in his nature. He'll keep watching. He'll keep posting. He'll keep firing off takes every time the league does something he thinks is dumb. And the league will keep insisting it's fine. And the players will keep fighting for their fair share. And the fans, old and new, will keep showing up, especially when number 22 is healthy and launching bombs from the logo. Because that's the thing nobody can argue with. When Caitlin Clark is on the court, magic happens. The arenas fill. The ratings spike. The whole sports world tilts in her direction. She is the rare athlete who transcends her sport, who pulls in people who never cared before, who turns a regular Tuesday game into appointment television. The only real question left is whether the league surrounding her is smart enough, humble enough, and quick enough to protect that magic, to pay it, to promote it, to build on it. or whether they'll keep standing there, frozen, while the ice underneath them gets thinner and thinner. Dave Portnoy gave his strong words. The numbers gave their cold, hard verdict. And the WNBA, for now, sits right where the title says. On ice. Waiting. Watching. And hoping that the brightest star they've ever had decides to come back, stay healthy, and keep the whole thing from freezing solid. Because, make no mistake, they need her far more than she needs them. And deep down, everybody in that league knows it. Even the ones who'll never say it out loud. Especially the ones who'll never say it out loud. And maybe that's the most telling part of this entire story. The loudest fights, the angriest tweets, the blocked calls, and the burned bridges, they all circle back to one simple truth that a guy who reviews pizza for a living figured out before anyone in the league office wanted to admit it. You don't get many chances to catch lightning. And when you do, you'd better not drop it. The WNBA caught its lightning. Now the whole world is watching to see if they hold on, or let it slip away into the cold.